Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is a Read in the Wind. Yeah! All right, so this is the first of what's looking to be a trilogy about Mrs. William Reed, and it's called Big Pimpin'. Have fun, guys. All right, so we're getting ready to close things out on the ladies of Professor Rabian's tableau parties of 1870-ish, and unfortunately, Mrs. Frank Elder has continued to elude me, although with this name, I'm sure we'll tangle somewhere down the line. And so that leaves Mrs. William Reed, R-E-E-D. Not to be confused with Mrs. William Reed, R-E-A-D. I mean, who could ever confuse those two? And we've saved the best for last, no doubt about it. Because as I was saying, Amy Darcy Wetmore serves her up on a silver platter in this article here, right? And because of this article, I have no doubt that Mrs. William Reed, this Mrs. William Reed, is actually the ringleader, the high priestess of this little coven of Diana-worshipping witches we have in Baltimore here. This coven that includes the likes of Miss Emily Louisa Harper Pennington, who was Billy the Kid's wife and R.G.'s mom, artist and possible forger extraordinaire. And she actually plays the part of Diana at this thing, all right? As does Mrs. Dr. Charles Carroll, right? Sally White. She plays Diana in this thing. And of course, we can't forget Miss Sophia Catherine Howard Reed, perhaps the most powerful woman in any room she happens to be standing in. And though I have no record of her playing Diana at Professor Rabien's tableau parties, no doubt she had her chance, given her penchant for entertaining and putting on theatricals. And I love this detail that she puts in. This is, remember, 1908. Someone, in speaking of her lately, so in the early 1900s, said her drawing room was the true idea of a salon, and she loved to gather around her the brilliant and often the unique. And I love this because it makes me wonder, what did unique mean in 1870 or the mid-1800s? Because today, unique could mean so many things, right? There are some really strange people out there that are unique, right? I mean, so what did that mean? And so Sophia Catherine Howard Reed would seem like the obvious choice for high priestess, queen witch, right? But no, I think that belongs to this Mrs. William Reed here, right? And so there's no picture for her that I could find. The part of Mrs. William Reed is being played by the lovely Emily Deschanel. And I love this picture because is it live or is it Tussaud? But anyway, so without further ado, let's get to the incredible, the absolutely Mud City Paradigm puzzle tree twisting tale that is Mrs. William Reed, nay Emily McKim. And right off the bat, I think it's interesting that her name is Emily because we now have two Emilys at this thing with different spellings. And so now it's very strange what's happening with these ladies and the similarities in their names, right? We have two Mrs. William Reeds with Reed spelled differently, and now we have two different Emilys with Emily spelled differently. And so I just wanted to check out what Emily meant real quick, and of course, it's derived from a Roman family name, Emilius, big shock that it's a Roman name, right? And the name may come from the Latin word meaning rival, which is interesting, right? Or the Greek term amilos, meaning wily or persuasive, which is really incredible because we're going to see just how wily and persuasive Mrs. Emily Reed can be. And so what a great start to the story of Mrs. William Reed, nay Emily McKim. And as I was saying, the McKim name is huge in this story. And we're going to unpack that down the line because we're going to start with her being one of the young married women then. And so that obviously means being Mrs. William Reed. And so not only being one of these young married women to Mr. William Reed, she was also a great genius in arranging theatricals and tableau. A great genius, right? And she also acted very well herself and frequently took part in the plays given at the Elkridge, which is where Sophia Catherine Howard Reed put on some plays, right? But also for the Wednesday Club. All right, so I'm not sure if she actually played Diana at any of these parties, but she certainly had her opportunities, right, with her great genius in arranging theatricals and tableau, and I'm sure there was no magic in this genius at all. Right? And Amy is kind enough to provide the name of other women who might be witches in this little coven here, of course, leading off with the elusive Mrs. Frank Elder, right? But we have a Mrs. Dobbin, and now Dobbin is a name that's actually on my Wednesday Club letterhead. All right, it's right at the top of the letter there. All right, we have a Mrs. Murray, we have a Mrs. Brown, and again, the Brown name is big in banking in Baltimore. Haven't really talked much about the Browns, right? And of course, closing things out with Mrs. Key. Right? And I think it's interesting the way that she delineates here. We have Mrs. MRS and then Mrs. down here. I don't know. But so anyway, Key, again, and the name Key just becoming more and more important in this story. But the secret truth about Mrs. William Reed, née McKim, starts to reveal itself in her obituary, as these things tend to do. And so she dies on May 10th, 1924, at 84 years of age. And she's one of those people who is fortunate, I guess, for lack of a better word, to be born and die on the same day, right? Which is a distinction that she shares with the likes of William Shakespeare, which is kind of interesting, because William Shakespeare may or may not have actually really existed. Also, he may or may not have been, if you remember, Mr. Roger Manners, the 5th Earl of Rutland, a.k.a. Lord Ross. He was raised by William Cecil, the Baron Baltimore's patron, right? And he was close friends with Squiggy, Robert Devereux. So kind of interesting that Shakespeare would kind of get brought in, and we have this evidence that perhaps this is Shakespeare, just by connecting this birth-death day thing, which I think is kind of interesting. But someone else who shares this distinction of being born and dying on the same day, and I think this is really interesting, given the fact that this story is chock-filled with strong, independent-minded women, and that's Betty Frieden. And so now Betty Frieden was a leading feminist who wrote The Feminine Mystique, which is the book that essentially launches the second wave of feminism, and certainly in America, right, anyway. And this wave of feminism, the centerpiece of it was equality in the workplace. Why was it the woman's role to have to stay home and take care of the kids and raise the kids? They could work, they could earn too. Someone else could take care of the children. The daycares or the schools or the television, who cares? Right? Because they could work, they could do the same things that men could do. And so, of course, Mud City sees things like feminism and the civil rights movement and the counterculture movement not as organic responses created by evolving societal demands, as the narrative suggests, but as this thing right here. Good old dose of that. Deliberately introduced programs meant to divide, to fracture us as a population, to remove the forest from the trees, as it were, right? Given this story. And seeing that she made her home in Washington, D.C. doesn't really do much to dispel these notions, right? But I just think it's very interesting, given the nature of the strong women in this story, that we can connect her to Mrs. William Reed this way through this birth-death day coincidence, for lack of a better word, right? And so as interesting as that connection is, it is nowhere near as interesting as the woman herself. All right, so here we go. Right? And because she has her hands in so many things, it's really crazy, right? And it starts with how proud she is of her ancestry. She's so very proud, right? But the thing about pride is how easily it turns into hubris, right? And I think it's this pride, this love of her ancestry that really trips her up here in Mud City, right? And so let's go, right? And so she loves her ancestry so much that she becomes interested in historical and genealogical organizations. Not only interested, but she forms them, right? She gathers up her little group of Diana witches, right? And they found and incorporate the Maryland Society, Colonial Dames of America. And she was elected original incorporator in December 1891. And this was all incorporated in Wilmington, Delaware. And I'm not sure if I need to remind you as to who and what is in Wilmington these days, right? But, all right, so she has the Colonial Dames of America, right? But not only that, right? She's a member of Thomas Johnson chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. And she's also on the National Society, United States Daughters of 1812, right? I mean, you want to talk about somebody who's proud of their ancestors' service to this great country of America. It is Mrs. William Reed, née Emily McKim, right? In 1878, she establishes the Decorative Art Society of Baltimore. And from the time of its establishment until her death in 1924, so we're looking at almost 50 years, right? She had been its only president. And this is the capper here. This is unbelievable. In 1895, she became founder and incorporator of the Maryland Society Daughters of the Confederacy. All right, so again, just is anybody catching a theme here as to what's happening in Baltimore with these high society people, the wealthiest people, the people in charge of the B&O Railroad and the government here in Baltimore? They all seem to be Confederates. It is unbelievable the way this story continues to unfold, right? And this is an angle that's not played up so much in the mainstream narrative of history. And perhaps one of the reasons why Baltimore is the shit show of a town it is today. And we're going to talk about the function of all of these societies in a minute, because this gets even better because she has other connections. How much more connected can one woman be? Right? So it says that at the time of her death, she was also the vice chairman of the Maryland Society of Colonial Governors. I mean, so she's a daughter of a governor as well. I mean, it's just ridiculous how many daughters she is. All right, so now it's from here. It's from here where this story explodes into the nether reaches of the Mud City Paradigm Puzzle Tree. This gets crazy, right? Because she was president of the International Society, Daughters of the Barons of Runnymede. And so, of course, not knowing a thing about the Barons of the Runnymede, I had to figure out what that was that she was the daughter of. Not only was she one of the daughters of, she was also, the honorary president of this society. And so here we go with the Daughters of the Barons of Runnymede, right? And so when you're a daughter of the Baron of Runnymede, you get a medal, right? Look at this thing. This is a gold medal, right? And the only way that you can get one is if you have direct lineage, right? If you are a lineal descendant of one or more of the 25 barons selected to enforce the Magna Carta, right? The Magna Carta. This is the early 13th century. It's King John, that king that all the presidents are related to. That's how far she's tracing her family back here. She's a daughter of the Barons of Runnymede. And so what the Runnymede was the area where the Magna Carta was signed, where it was ratified with King John. All right. And so a lot of people confuse the Magna Carta as being like the first contract between sort of like the common man and government. And that's not really true. What it is it's this contract between King John and the barons. See, King John has been pissing these barons off with what they feel are unreasonable demands on their resources, their land and their men. He's fighting lots of wars and he's not really paying these barons, I guess, what they feel that their service is worth. They create this contract to sort of keep him in check, right? And it's these 25 guys here. So Mrs. William Reed, née Emily McKim, she traces her lineage back to one of these 25 or more of these 25 families. But which one or ones, right? Which family is hers in here? And now in Mud City, we've actually come across a few of these names. And unbelievably enough, right near the top of the list, we have Robert DeRose, right? And as we saw earlier, Roger Manners was known as Lord Rose. So we have that name, right? The name Mowbray has come to me, but I don't think I've talked about it in the show at all. But Mowbray is a name that I've looked into a little bit in the past. And there are a couple of names like Fitzrobert. Maybe I read that name down the line. DeLacy is definitely ringing bells here. But the biggest bells are down here, of course, trying to hide near the bottom, are the DeClares. And so now I don't know if you remember, but the DeClares, they become usurped. They sort of morph into the Audley family. And the Audley family is, of course, the Touchés. So it's conceivable that somewhere Mrs. William Reed, née Emily McKim, could be related to the Touchés. Could the DeClare family be the family that she traces back to the Runnymede and the Magna Carta? I don't know, but very interesting that she would connect her bloodline back to the very earliest, the highest nobility in England, those early Norman dukes and lords. And it makes me wonder how many of those families are still that high up the food chain today. How high is her family in the food chain today, going forward? Like, who are the Reeds today? Just closing out quickly on the Magna Carta. I'm not really going to talk about the Magna Carta that much because there was a different contract going around at the time, one that actually represented the common people in grievances against the crown and the monarchy. And that contract was called the Charter of the Forest. right? And what it did was it reestablished for free men rights of access to the royal forest that had been eroded by King William the Conqueror. And so I don't know if you remember, but when William the Conqueror came over, he essentially took over a third of the land and turned it into royal forest, which put a hardship on some of the free people of the land because they were reliant on that forest, for resources. And so now this just gave some of those privileges back to the people. Like, you would no longer be executed for hunting deer in a royal forest kind of thing. All right. And so what this contract actually does, though, is by reducing the size of the royal forest, it creates smaller royal forests, which facilitates the needs for, right, you guessed it, keepers of the forest. Keepers like John Byron and Richard Poe, of these smaller forests like Sherwood. It's just interesting the way the puzzle tree is reaching this thing right back to Poe from the tableau party. But regardless of how it stretches out, right, it always stretches back to the blue bloods, and no one's blood is bluer than hers, apparently, right? And so now let's talk a little bit about what all of these societies did, what their job was, why it was important to be a member of the Maryland Society of Colonial Governors, or the Colonial Dames, or this International Society, again, honorary president, the highest nobility of 13th century England, honorary president, blue blood. It's just crazy. And she was also vice president of this Maryland of the Journal of American History, and a member of the Maryland Historical Society. And so what it means to be in these societies, what your job is as a daughter of these societies. Your job is to spread the word. You're a propagandist, right? It's psychological warfare. Because Mrs. William Reed, née Emily McKim, she was interested actively in all of the great industrial and commercial exhibitions in this country and abroad, from the Philadelphia Centennial in 1876 to the Paris Exposition in 1900 to the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. She was appointed commissioner to represent the Women's Board of Managers on the Women's Commission. And so now this is true of her, like, up into her death. She did this well through the early 1900s and into, like, the World War I era. I don't know if during World War I and thereafter, but she was definitely involved in these expositions, up through the early part of the 1900s. And so what she would do, of course, at all of these things, was she would be pimping the colonial narrative. What life in America was during colonial times, what the Revolutionary War was in the War of 1812, really pushing the history out there. And what she used to do, and unfortunately I downloaded the article, but I must not have labeled it because I couldn't find it, but I did read an article where it talks about all the things that she brings with her, and she would bring some small furniture and, like small mirrors and some weapons and costumes of, what the soldiers wore, what the gentlemen and ladies of the era wore, and things like this. And this is what she would present at like tables at these exhibitions, at these expositions, right? She would pimp the story. She would pimp these stories out there. Because let's not forget how wily and persuasive she is. And she's not doing this alone, right? She was about to get a lot of help, in the form of the public education system, which is getting ready to really get rolling right after this 1870-ish time. We're going to be talking more about that down the line as well, because she has significant help in that department. But that's what I see. This is what Mud City is telling me about this, about her involvement in all of these societies and what it meant to be in them and what you had to do. It was your job to spread that narrative. All right, she doesn't do this work gratis, right? No, she gets paid to do this work. And like any good pimp worth their weight in salt, she actually gets the Maryland legislature, the state of Maryland, to give her an appropriation of $60,000 at one point. Now, $60,000 is almost $2 million today. Interesting that it says that in her appeal for this $60,000, she becomes the second woman in Maryland to speak before the General Assembly, the first being Mistress Margaret Brent. And so now, I don't know about you, but did the obituary writer forget that Sophia Catherine Howard Reed spoke before the Maryland General Assembly and was granted covenanting rights? Or were they instructed not to put that in there? I don't know, but it's just another shining example of how important these ladies were to the story. And so Mrs. William Reed, née Emily McKim, she was also recognized for her humanitarian service, especially during the wars. right? The Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and the First World War. A clear predecessor for the work that's done today, like with the Ukraine crisis and things like this, right? I mean, this is what she did during those times. She raised resources, clothing, food, money, that kind of thing. And so this is where the obituary ends, right? So let's just take a minute to recap what we've learned about Mrs. William Reed, née Emily McKim, daughter of and founder of just about every colonial society for women that there is, right? That she was the honorary president of the Daughters of the Barons of the Runnymede, right? Which is unbelievable. That she was a daughter of the Confederacy, and she was a great genius in throwing theatricals and tableau parties, right? And as Mud City has it, that she could be the high priestess of this Diana worshipping coven. And so if we can learn all of this about her, imagine what we can learn about her husband, right? And so that's where we'll pick it up in the next cauldron stirring episode. Remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? And so until the next one, cheers, guys.